This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this is it, baby. First week of NBA basketball is in the books. And who would have thought, if you were to tell me the Orlando Magic, the Minnesota Timberwolves are among the top teams in the NBA right now, as far as records go, I would basically be telling you are out of your damn mind. But this is the state of play here in the NBA, and there's so much to talk about regarding first week NBA impressions. I can't wait to do it with my right-hand man. This is the last episode for 2020, so we are kicking 2021 with a bang with this upcoming episode, man. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Nice way for us to go out, man, after such a tumultuous 2020, brother.
It is a nice way to go out, and I'm excited the NBA season is upon us, as you alluded to, man. There's a lot to dive into in this first week of basketball, which will now take us out of the 2020 year and into what will hopefully be a glorious 2021. But again, I cannot wait to get into this week's topics, so I think our fans and listeners are truly going to enjoy it all.
Absolutely, man. I mean, we've got some nice stuff to talk about, but we're gonna dress it up real nice for our listeners, man. We're going to introduce a few new segments that we're going to be rolling out through the course of the year. It's just going to be a good time, man. It's just a really solid way for us to get through the bevy of topics that are happening right now in the association. So be sure to check this out, man. We got our episode of Doubt That, About That. We also got our What the F segments to cover. And then, it's been a while since we've done this, my man Shaw, man. We did this a while back and introduced this because we always felt like when it comes to some of the NBA players, the redemption, their ability to redeem themselves in the eyes of not just the followers, but to the game itself, man. Hoops redemption is back on the docket.
As well, it should be. I think it was a great topic that you came up with. I don't know, maybe 2-3 years ago, maybe even longer than that. I think we had maybe Josh Smith on our first ever hoops redemption conversation. So Smith ain't been in the league in a long time, but in any event, it's great to see how this topic has evolved. And we're gonna have a lot of great players in here who are looking for hoop redemption. Some injury riddled, some who just had crappy years last year and need to bounce back. So I think this is something that will get the fans going as well. I'd be interested to see who they would pick to put on this redemption list, but we'll get to it when we get to it, man. A lot of great topics in store, brother.
Absolutely. So as always, man, we encourage each and every single listener to chime in with us. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at Game Face Lead. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms that you listen to podcasts. Whatever you listen to, just look for the Baseline NBA podcast. Add us to your playlist and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. If you listen to sports via online radio, be sure to check out Dash Radio via the Nothing But Net Radio Network, where you can catch the Baseline NBA show Tuesdays 1 p.m. And then also for our listeners who've been following along with us, to our people who are just chiming in or interested in all of our previous shows, you can check us out on our home site, www.thebaselineNBA.com. We've got a lot of great content available for you and yours to listen to, great interviews, so be sure to check us out there as well, too. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's end 2020 right here with the breakdown.
Time to break it
down. Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warrenshaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic for the breakdown, man, is covering Week 1 of the NBA. We're going to do a little differently, though. There's so many different storylines to get into when we talk about a first week of the beginning of an NBA season. And it could just basically be a whole lot of back and forth banter, which, that's not completely our MO. We want to make sure that we're giving you and we're covering as much as we possibly can. So we're going to break this down into two really interesting segs for our purposes of the breakdown, right? So the first segment, and I'm really excited about this because we're kind of rolling this out, so expect to see this a little bit more often throughout the course of the year when you catch episodes of our show. But basically, we're gonna format this a little bit in the way of, are you about that or do you doubt that, right? Like, when you think about whether or not the Brooklyn Nets are could possibly be the most dangerous team that is capable of dethroning the favored Los Angeles Lakers Shaw, are you about that or do you doubt that?
I'm about that. About it. Master P, the whole nine. I think Brooklyn is in a very, very unique space and situation this year with a very deep roster, a motivated Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, who I think are going to be, from early indications, better than even I expected them to be. And I still thought they would win the Atlantic Division, but this team seems special very early on to me. They're extremely deep. The roles seem to have been accepted, and it looks like they're going to continue to be accepted. Yes, they haven't faced any adversity yet, and that is the biggest test of any Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving-led team, especially with those dudes who I continue to say are moody at all times. But it doesn't seem like they're going to alienate. They're fine kind of taking turns right now, and everybody else is like, hey, I'll pick my spots, especially a guy like LeVert, who does need high usage. He's embraced that six-man role so far and seems like he's going to thrive in that. I think Brooklyn is uniquely poised to be one of the best teams in the NBA, and maybe with a historical offense, something similar to what we saw even in Dallas last year, but maybe a little bit more efficient with those two guys leading the way.
I have to agree with you. I mean, if you're going to ask me, do I doubt that or I'm about that? Right now, the eye test is giving me that I'm about that feeling, right? And I'm going to actually flip it a little bit, Shaw. It's not the offense that is giving me the confidence of saying it. It's actually their defense. I think that they may surprisingly be a really good defensive basketball team. And so when you couple that with a team that can score the basketball as fluidly great as what we're seeing right now, and again, it's only a few games, but the way that they're able to defend against, any team that Steph Curry is on, that the team is going to shoot the basketball. And right now, they're among the best as far as defending the three. They are the best as far as opposing teams' field goal percentage. So already I'm seeing that there's a commitment. And it was something that I was a little bit questionable about with Steve Nash being the head coach, because I don't know if the emphasis is on opening up, the offensive floodgates a little bit like what happened when Steph Curry, got with Steve Kerr. The defensive principles had already been there because it was instilled by Mark Jackson. So it's kind of ironic that the defensive principles for the Brooklyn Nets were instilled by Kenny Atkinson and Jacques Vaughn, and now Steve Nash is coming in, and already we're seeing how the offensive weaponry is on full tilt. But the one thing that seems to be solid right now, that hasn't lost any footing, that may even gain ground as the year goes on, health pending, is the fact that they can play some pretty damn good defense, which bodes well, especially in the Eastern Conference.
Again, I agree 100% there. I think with Durant, especially if you look back to the Christmas Day game, he was guarding Tatum while giving the Celtics buckets on the other end. Tatum was not guarding Durant. The fact that he's willing to take on that role right away, coming off of his Achilles injury, saying, listen, I'm going to be a two-way guy. I'm not going to take plays off defensively and not necessarily guard the best guy that the other teams have. And he's switchable still with his length and does a great job. He was blocking shots left and right in the preseason as well, too. So Durant seems to be back to his Golden State level defense, which we were surprised to see initially when he migrated there from OKC. And he seems to have carried that with him now to Brooklyn and instilling that mentality. Kyrie, even in the first two games, is trying harder. He's not a great defender, but he's trying harder to be there and stay in front of guys. And I think with DeAndre and Jared Allen, those two guys who can patrol the paint and deter any would-be drivers, that gives you some backline defense that you are going to feel confident by, even if you do get blown by on the perimeter. So Brooklyn is in a very, very nice space to begin the season. Yes, I want to see what they do when they do lose a game or two in a row, and see if there's some pointing of fingers a little bit, or role acceptances that don't no longer kind of roll into everything, the great vibes that they had thus far. But for right now, they seem like they are ready to roll and on pace for a very, very unique season, as I alluded to earlier on.
One thing I want to add on before we move on to the next about that, doubt that, Shaw. I think part of the reason why Kyrie Irving is making a better effort, a sincere effort, is for two things. Number one, the onus of being a team captain, a team leader, is definitely off Kyrie Irving's shoulder. This isn't, as much as we want to laud the combination of Irving and Durant, this is clearly going to ride on the shoulders of Kevin Durant and Kevin Durant being the man. I think everybody on that roster recognizes that their best pathway to a championship is how well Kevin Durant plays. And I think that takes the burden off of Kyrie Irving, who could just go out there and be the most elite two guard that we've always said that he's capable of being. But when you start adding on responsibilities and accountability, that's when, ish goes off the rails. But I think the other thing that I think puts emphasis on Kyrie Irving's accountability to play better defensively is because they still have Dinwiddie and Landry Shamet. We're not going to talk about this now, but I think at some point during the course of this season, we're going to talk about how important it is having a guy like Landry Shamet on this team, along with Spencer Dinwiddie, because I think when they're out on the basketball court, Kyrie Irving sees things. He sees how he could be a better player defensively. When you have guys that know that they're just that damn good and don't want to go out and do what they need to do, sometimes you need guys on the floor who may not score the ball like Kyrie Irving, but does the other things better, showing them how to do it on the basketball court. And the fact that Sean Marks has put together this kind of roster that has that kind of balance also puts accountability on where their superstar players need to be in critical moments or critical runs or critical playoff series. That lends to the idea that they can all step up and do what's necessary. Like, it isn't, I can't do it. Everyone should be able to do it.
Let me chime in real quick on this. I think the old ladder, sometimes a great defense is a great offense. And I think in some ways that's what you might be seeing here as well, because they're so, in the few games we've seen, but even just the intimidation of what Kyrie and KD can do. Joe Harris pulling up on threes in people's faces thus far. As you mentioned, even Shamet just feels very comfortable out there. LeVert, all of that. The way Brooklyn is scoring early on is making the other team like, oh shit, we better go down here and get a basket. And that tightness actually plays to Brooklyn's favor, because if you feel like, oh, I have to make this shot, even with, if you're slightly defended, even the jitters of that to some degree, like the psychological aspect of the pressure Brooklyn is putting on you on that side of it, that actually helps your defense. I know it's kind of like those weird psychoanalysis thing, and it's like, what is this guy talking about? But if you really look at it, that it does make some sense there, because if you feel like, if I don't make this shot, I know they're coming down, they're going to score on the back end, that plays into it and actually can help Brooklyn's defense overall.
All right, now let's go on to our second about that. Doubt that. The Houston Rockets will suffer more with James Harden on this team than without him. You about that, or you doubt that?
I'm going to doubt it, only for the fact that he's not going to acquiesce and pout about playing in a game. He's going to go out there and give it his max effort. And I think in that aspect, he's going to continue to be a gamer. Now, what it does from a locker room standpoint, I understand. And that's why I think most people would say, oh, they're definitely about that. Like, he can't be here. Like, he has to go. He's toxic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think for us, when it just comes down to playing basketball, he's still one of the best there is, and one of the best we've ever seen, especially on the offensive side of things. And once they get Wall and Cousins and Gordon and everybody back into the fold with the addition of Christian Wood, I think for the long term, or in the short term, Houston can be a viable playoff team. Like, I've seen enough already to know, like, listen, thick Harden, as he's being called on Twitter, is not going to matter. He's still going to produce, and the surrounding pieces around him can do that as well. But there is obviously legitimate concern about his antics, what he's doing on the outside. And if he really does not care about COVID protocols, then yeah, that could be a huge, huge concern. But the basketball player, Harden, the beard, that dude's a killer, and I think Houston can survive if he can get some of the other stuff off the court under control.
I am so about that. I think the Houston Rockets will suffer more, but I don't think it's for the reasons that everyone's assuming. I don't think it's necessarily about the fact that James Harden is a cancer to the Houston Rockets. I think the Houston Rockets are going to suffer more because if you are about the business of not wanting James Harden on your roster, for whatever your reasons are, having a guy whose ball usage, to me, sucks the life out of truly assessing what kind of basketball team Stephen Silas is going to have to work with when you do eventually get rid of James Harden. It's not to say that James Harden's not capable of scoring you 40 plus like he just did the other night. It's what will this basketball team be when you don't have the luxury of having that kind of player? And usually when a guy scores this much, it usually translates to a team definitely being among one of the better teams in the NBA, or in this case, the Western Conference, or maybe being one of the top echelon teams of their division. We don't know what the circumstance is going to be for the Houston Rockets if they're not going to be definitive about what their plans are going to be for James Harden. Now, obviously, the Houston Rockets are going to keep this close to the vest, but I'm just saying from a team perspective, if you are certainly going to move off the James Harden train, it's going to come down to what the other players are going to give you and contribute to. And I just worry sometimes that you've got guys that are so dependent on the greatness of a guy like James Harden that to lose that may also mean you're losing guys' internal confidence that they can step up and help to make up the difference of what's necessary for the Houston Rockets to be a successful basketball team, simply because you know that you have to move on from James Harden. Again, James Harden is a great player. James Harden's going to score buckets, but James Harden also holds that basketball. And so that team is ultimately going to be held hostage at the greatness of James Harden more often than not. And that, to me, is the part that I worry about. And if you're the Houston Rockets, can you live with doing that instead of just moving this organization forward with the pieces that you currently have, knowing that at some point you're going to get rid of one of your main cogs in the James Harden?
It's a valid point. The only thing I'd say is that, at least for them, there's not like some young stud behind Harden or even on the roster anywhere that he's holding up, right? He's not like taking touches away from people, so to speak, even with his high usage. It's great. Oh, it would just be evenly distributed between Wall and Gordon and Wood and Cousins and whoever else, Daniel Houses of the world, so to speak. But there's not some elite level young stud like if it was like the Celtics and Tatum, like when Kyrie was there or something like that. You know what I mean? Where those touches aren't going his way now and he's not getting a chance to develop. So while the point is valid on its face, I think in some ways the counterpoint is like, all right, well, would you rather have Harden making those touches and having that usage, or kind of the gimpy John Wall and Eric Gordons of the world, and even Cousins, who I love as well too, is like, all right, hey, you just give them a shot? Because the only other caveat to that is like, if they were to move Harden, who do they get back, right? And then would those touches go to that person, so to speak? And in a perfect world, well, not in a perfect world, but in the rumored world that we live in right now, Ben Simmons seems to be the most likely candidate. And Simmons is not going to be a high usage guy taking 20, 25 shots a night. So, there you have it. I think he can go a lot of different ways in Houston, but I think both points are valid. So you can be both about that and doubt that at the same time, for sure.
Yeah, I love how you always be taking my about that's and you putting doubt on that about that. I love that. I appreciate that. You're tuned to You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren-Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and we are doing our breakdown. All right, Shaw, third on that, I'm about that, doubt that the Warriors will struggle a lot more than we think this year.
Oh, 100% about it.
You about it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yes, they've been on the road the first couple of games of the season. They've gotten beat by, 20, 30 points or whatever it is without Draymond Green. But listen, this team is just not there yet. Wiseman looks great, and I think he's going to need to get more touches as the season progresses. But you look at Wiggins, and I hate to say it, but all the hate, everything seems to be true. Like, that guy is just, he's not ready. And I don't know if he's ever going to be ready. And last year's 20 point per game or whatever it was, for the majority of the season seems to be an anomaly. He's really struggling to find a shot. Oubre struggled to find a shot as well too, although he's an improved player. And I think there was some crazy stat in the first two games. He was basically 0 for 14 or 0 for something on anything that wasn't a dunk. So if he didn't dunk it, he wasn't making it. And those are some early season struggles that they'll correct themselves. I mean, it's just, they're NBA guys and they're going to figure some things out. But ultimately, this team is going to struggle offensively, especially without Curry on the floor. Even if you bring Draymond back, while he can create, he's not necessarily a great threat to score. And I wonder how Kerr is going to figure that out as the season progresses.
I think the thing that really just sticks out to me, Shaw, is just the fact that it's one thing that defensively, because their defense has been deteriorating, year in, year over, even when they've had Klay Thompson on this roster. But I think the fact that they're struggling to score the basketball to me just sticks out more than anything else. So if you're going to ask me whether or not I'm about that or I doubt that, I'm totally about that. And this is exactly the reason why I said that the Warriors are going to probably be one of the teams that are going to play in to get into the 8th seed rather than assuming that they're going to be one of the top 8 teams coming out of the Western Conference. There's no indication in signs that's telling me that the Golden State Warriors are going to be a team that can incrementally improve so much so that it gives you any confidence that they're going to be a better basketball team by the end of the year. They'll be good enough probably to be in playoff conversations, but they'll never be good enough to be a one of the mid-tier basketball teams that we were talking about in our preview.
I think this is why, in some ways, while we're dissing them as they are right now, this is why I'd at least give them credit for sniffing around James Harden. Yeah. I think Bob Myers and company might have realized, like, we may not really have it like we wanted to, especially without Clay. And Clay's injury is going to be a lot more, as again, poignant as you alluded to, than I think maybe a lot of people initially thought. I think some analysts still had Golden State. It's like, I can still see him as a 4th seed. And I was like, what are you smoking? Like, there's no chance this team can do that. So as you alluded to, I had them in the bottom 8, so probably in that play-in tournament. But I had them as kind of an 8 seed, whereas you had them just in that 9-10 range. So we both have similar projections for them, but we'll ultimately see where this lies. And if they can find a way to get off Wiggins and get somebody a little bit more competent and who cares about basketball more, then then they should probably be in a lot better shape. And then as they try to obviously build around Wiseman some as well too, as Kerr's.
But I think that's the focus. Like, listen, I think that's the focus. I know that this sounds kind of crazy and it's very early, and yes, he's a rookie, but I think that's the focus. I think if you're the Golden State Warriors, I think you have to start thinking, re-strategizing the way that you go about trying to score the basketball. Because, again, this still comes down to how much of the onus, how much of the burden are you really putting on Steph Curry to score that ball? I think if Steph Curry can find symmetry with a James Wiseman, I think that helps that basketball team tremendously. Let him be the guy. Get that ball down to him. Change the dynamic of what people have already caught up to on how to play the Golden State Warriors offensively. And that might give you a chance. And again, Wiseman is growing. But to tell me that you're going to be depending on the wings, the Oubres and the Wiggins for you to do what you were previously doing when you didn't have Klay Thompson or you did have Klay Thompson, I think is an unwise move for the Golden State Warriors if they want to give themselves any semblance of a shot at competing in the Western Conference.
Yeah, 100% agree. So Kerr, we'll see if he adjusts and recognizes, and that's a conversation he and Myers will have as well too. Do we want to be this low end playoff team, or do we want to start really building towards the future? And if we don't make the playoffs as a result of it, then that's okay. I think the problem with that is that you have Curry, who's been a multiple time MVP, all NBA, going to be a Hall of Famer, et cetera, even Draymond Green, all of those things too. Except obviously not the MVPs, but potentially as on a Hall of Fame track potentially in some people's minds. And is a multi-time champion. Like, those two guys aren't going to settle for losing. And that's a hard conversation I think Myers and Kerr would have to have if they say, all right, we're going to completely change the way, or maybe not completely, but start to alter the way we play, giving Wiseman and the younger guys more touches and seeing what Curry can do to build off of that as well too. Curry, the offense will still be Curry focused. Like, let's not get it twisted. But, Wiseman really may have to be that second option more than maybe he even thought or was going to anticipate, with Wiggins and Oubre taking some severe steps back.
All right, Shaw. Final doubt that about that. The San Antonio Spurs look like a changed and renewed basketball team. You about that, or do you doubt that?
I'm 100% about it, only from the aspect of we started to see the change in the bubble without LaMarcus Aldridge. And Pop was just like, all right, well, we don't have our big, how can we try to be competitive with this roster? And they got great contributions from Derek White and DeJounte Murray, and then obviously DeRozan as well too, playing in this secondary playmaker role that he started to accept since coming to San Antonio. It's been quite the transformation for DeRozan, I think. So the fact that this team is off to the start that they are, without even White being back yet, who they just inked to a nice contract extension as well. LaMarcus, as I alluded to in our Western Conference preview, he's going to be more of a perimeter-based power forward / center now, who's not going to get as many touches. He just kind of have to get in where he fits in. And the offense is really focused around DeJounte and DeRozan until White gets back as well. Going into this as we record, listen, DeRozan is almost averaging a triple-double and Murray's almost averaging a triple-double. And remember, Murray was my most improved pick of the year, who I thought could win it. I'm skeptical in the fact that he can keep up this pace. I'm also skeptical that he'll get the attention because San Antonio just never doesn't really seem to do that for a lot of guys. But the fact that those two guys are off to the starts they are really have the Spurs sitting, as one of the best teams in the Southwest right now in a way that I didn't think we'd expect them, especially doing it on the offensive side.
I'm definitely about that because I'm of that motto, give a little, get a little, right? The San Antonio Spurs over the last few years have rested their laurels on the fact that if they play ugly enough basketball, they play defense, they can keep themselves within basketball games because they struggle to score the basketball from an offensive perspective. This team is the third best scoring basketball team right now, and it's just only 2 games. But if you were to tell me that the San Antonio Spurs are capable of scoring about 125 points per game at the way that they're scoring the basketball, I would be like, damn. Right? Like, because even if they fall off, Shaw, they're not going to look like the basketball team that struggles scoring about 103, 104, 105 points per game, which is exactly what the San Antonio Spurs kind of do when they're so focused on being a defensively enabled basketball team. So the fact that they're opening it up more points to the fact that here we go again, Greg Popovich is finding a way. He's kind of opening things up, Lord. Maybe he's a little bit more confident in what he wants to get out of Dejounte Murray, to your point, Joe, which again may lend to the fact that this puts him in a better position for him to be most improved player. I think more than anything else, man, and I don't know if it's because it's contractually motivated or whatever the case may be, but for DeMar DeRozan, this, to me, is about as good as it's going to get for him and Greg Popovich. I think you would have seen this a couple of years ago when the trade was made, but whatever the motivation factor is for DeMar DeRozan to be this kind of player is exactly what the San Antonio Spurs is going to need from an offensive perspective. Defensively, I think they're going to be a decent defensive basketball team. I think that they can let the gas up a little bit and not focus so much more on them being a defensive mindset basketball team because they're going to need to score the basketball with the kind of heavy hitters that are still hanging around in the Western Conference.
Yeah, I think that them not forcing Jakob Poeltl to be somebody that maybe he's not, I think just because of the Kawhi Leonard factor, he just wanted to try to maximize every piece out of that, but Poeltl is who he is, and you can't force him to be like a superstar. So the fact that even guys like Keldon Johnson are coming in and getting great minutes at that 3 and 4 spot for San Antonio. Obviously, we talked about Derek White a little bit as well too. Just Pop understanding that the roster has changed and we need to figure out a way to keep ourselves and even keep himself relevant in this aspect. Before we move on, though, some breaking news as we discuss this here, not necessarily San Antonio, but going back to Golden State real quick. Marquis Chris is now going to miss the remainder of the season with, I think it's a tibial injury. Shams is reporting out there. So further the devastation to this Golden State team in the hopes Chris is a nice rotation piece for them. And now he will not be there, which unfortunately, in my opinion, brings Looney back up the depth chart a little bit. I think Chris should.
I'm sure.
So
Javon Looney is a great person for us to throw in our next part of the breakdown segment. So finish your thoughts, Shaw.
Well, I think with Looney, it's just, listen, Kerr has this unreasonable like for the dude that I guess I've never quite figured out. Similar to Brad Stevens and Shemi Ojeleye in Boston. I just don't see what they see. And now I think Looney kind of is going to get upset on the depth chart only because Chris is out. So terrible injury for Marquis Chris, who's really starting to turn his career around. I mean, he's another one who's almost out of the league based on not being able to understand how to play and understanding how to use his talents and his gifts. And Golden State seemed to kind of reclaim them a little bit. And now he has to go through this injury in a year where Golden State really could have used his talents and skill set. So Kevon Looney to the rescue, I guess, in GSW.
Absolutely, man. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, Javon Looney and our favorite segment.
What the actual fuck?
Here on The Baseline. This is The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Final episode before we ring in 2021. NBA season is underway. And in our segment of the breakdown, our favorite topic, what the F? And I guess the first topic of conversation, aside from Javon Looney, right? Like, name calling, roll calling out Javon Looney is a what the F moment. But I guess a much better what the F moment, Shaw, is if you were to tell me the Orlando Magic and the Minnesota Timberwolves come out of the first week of the NBA as an undefeated team as we're recording this podcast, my actual thought would be, what the F?
For sure. And, I'm surprised with Minnesota. I'm surprised with Orlando. Vucevic is a great basketball player. I mean, I think he doesn't play a lot of great defense per se, but what he does give you is a competent guy who can pass, who can obviously score and rebound, and is a lighthouse for Orlando. Markelle Fultz looks rejuvenated, is playing well. Gordon seems to be playing well too, without Isaacs, kind of getting in his way, and they're playing a little bit faster too in Orlando. So credit, the coaching staff there to understanding that, hey, we can't do things in the old same fashion. We have to adjust, and that's starting to work out. Cole Anthony's played well coming off the bench, not to mention, I think with Terrence Ross, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In Minnesota, Cat, D'Angelo, no problem. Like, we know what we're going to get there. Okogie's played pretty well to begin the year, but to me, it's been Ant-Man. Anthony Edwards coming off the bench as a rookie. He's shown some chops as a playmaker. He's been a pretty efficient scoring the basketball too. And while really just kind of proving doubters wrong, like, hey, it's the reason why he's the number one pick, and he's going to be ready one day to really maybe step into that starting lineup. Blake Beasley, for all his bullshit in the offseason, he's played great these first two games, in the high teens and early 20s, scoring the basketball, getting a couple rebounds here and there. Hey, I've got nothing but great things to say other than the fact, but the only negative I'll say is Minnesota started off great last year as well too. So we'll take this with a grain of salt, but congrats to those two teams for getting off to hot starts.
Absolutely. Listen, if you're the Magic and you're the Timberwolves, you need to be in the mix, and you need to be in the mix early in your respective divisions. All right. The Dallas Mavericks look like they're going to struggle more than I'd hope. What the F?
I'll let you take this one, man, because I think, you're a pretty big Mavs and Luka Porzingis fan here. So go ahead and take this one here with Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Dallas Mavericks, I had expectations that, they're going to be a middle tier playoff team in the Western Conference. I have them picked or favored to win the Southwest Division. I think my biggest concern is that they just don't look like a fluid basketball team at the moment. They look like, a deer looking in the headlights right now. Like, they just absolutely have lost their way from what they looked like, last season. Now, I can't depict this as saying, okay, well, the dependency of this team is because they're waiting for Kristaps Porzingis to join this basketball team. But Luka Doncic is kind of playing like he certainly wishes that he had Kristaps Porzingis on this basketball team, because it doesn't look like he has the same confidence, in his players in the same way that he showed his dependency on those guys to help him become the kind of MVP caliber player that he is. Now, it's early right now, and obviously playing against, the favored champs, it's one of those circumstances where it's just like, this is what you expect, kind of, sort of, whatever. I'm thinking, though, if you're the Mavericks, if you're Rick Carlisle, you need to get out to a good start. You need to win some games, get some confidence in you, so that when Kristaps comes back, the pressure and the burden is not going to be that you're playing from behind. So the fact that we've seen this basketball team allow 138 points to the Los Angeles Lakers, a team who's is gonna be kind of slowly getting themselves back, right? It's just inexcusable. They can play better basketball. I'm just a little disappointed. Hopefully they will turn things around, but man, they're giving me a couple of what the F moments when I'm watching them play on the basketball court.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and I think my only caveat to this is I wasn't as high on them even with Porzingis, but knowing that he wasn't going to start the year is it's tough. And while I still pick Luka to win MVP because he's amazing, the fact that he's coming out of shape and he's accepted that and is like, hey, I've just never been, a kind of, a big muscular guy, just kind of is what it is, kind of almost Paul Pierce fashion, then that's not necessarily acceptable.
It's discouraging.
It's for an MVP. Yeah,
just because I say you the Don don't mean you got to eat like you a Don. That's all that I'm saying, right? So, yeah. And then, inexplicably, they go out and damn near blow out the Los Angeles Clippers by some 50-something points. I mean, seriously, Dallas Mavericks, what the F made me waste my voice thinking that you guys just ain't on the right track, man? Man, stay consistent, damn it.
Right, so...
All right, Shaw.
He's going to work himself into shape.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Shaw. Celtics window to move the championship, to win a championship is done.
I mean, this is like one of those investigative reports I think we should probably do and maybe table for another day. But ultimately, I think Boston is they're not as great as they think they are. And while Tatum and Brown, even Brown specifically, is showing some really great early season improvement, the rest of the roster still has some stuff to be desired. So as we record, yeah, they're 1-1. They beat Milwaukee at home, and that was a nice win. But it took a Tatum bank three to get it done. Thompson fouled Giannis, and Giannis missed a free throw that could have tied the game. And who knows if that game goes to overtime where ultimately ends. And they just got lambasted by the aforementioned Brooklyn Nets. So I think this team is just they're still a piece away. And that traded player exemption that they got from Gordon Hayward, at this point, and I know it's early, but I would be surprised if Ainge does not try to use it this year. I've had some great conversations about this and what he could do with it. Would he wait to the off season to figure out if is a true star can come available? There's a caveat to this TPE that because they're hard cap, they can't actually use the full $28 million. They can use $21 million of the 28, and it's going to be interesting. But if they can figure out a way to maybe get a guy like DeRozan that gives him Gordon Hayward-ish type production, if you will, from San Antonio, if the Spurs were to maybe punt on their season for whatever reason, which doesn't seem likely based on the start they've just had. But people like that is who, and they can get Evan Fournier, they can get Aaron Gordon, things. I think Boston is going to end up using that TPE because there's still something missing from this team and this roster that Tatum and Brown, even with their overall just being young and going to get better just by virtue of youth and experience and maturity, I just don't think they have it. And this is still the caveat that Kemba Walker's out until God knows when. And I think that's a bigger issue in that of itself.
Yeah, the moment that we saw Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving on the basketball court play the way that they're capable of playing is the moment I just said Celtics window is done. Now, they'll be a good basketball team. They'll be a solid basketball team. But until Danny Ainge does something literally bold, if you're going to tell me you're resting on the combination of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to eventually ascend to the level of what you're seeing from a Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, or you're seeing from a Giannis Antetokounmpo, Drew Holiday, and Chris Middleton, I'm sorry. I'm not seeing it. I'm not sold on it. And, I just think it's going to be what it is. And, I'm just going to have a lot of WTF moments when I think about the Boston Celtics, because I think that there were just some years that they could have put themselves in that position to be playing in the finals. Final one, Shaw. The Chicago Bulls and Billy Donovan. Billy Donovan's already frustrated with his team's effort. What the F?
That's what he's saying in the locker room. Like, he's like, hey, we've been home for 2 games and we've gotten our just shit handed to us. It's been just frustrating to watch. And Kobe White as the starting point guard, not getting it done. Markkanen, who we'll talk about maybe a little bit later on, playing a little bit better. But Levine has just gotten off to kind of a slow start, and it's just defensively they have nothing. And I think one of the prime culprits of this has actually been Wendell Carter, who was much maligned in whatever system that was being run before, but hasn't necessarily progressed in the way that a lot of people would have hoped under Billy Donovan's charge. It's early. There's a lot to be desired here, but you got Otto Porter coming off the bench, and he seems fine with the role. You got Denzel Valentine coming back from his injuries, seems fine with the role. They started Patrick Williams, who they drafted, and I think that's probably a good move ultimately because you want to just start developing guys, but something is just not clicking in Chicago just yet, and Donovan has a lot of work to do.
Yeah, look, the Bulls suck. Billy Donovan is going to have his hands full, for this season, and I think it's shaking time, right, man? It's time to shake the tree and see what comes loose, and I think that having a guy like Billy Donovan is a good thing because you finally get to expose, look, we've already talked about how the organization just doesn't have its together, but if we're going to start talking about some WTF with this Chicago Bulls team, it's got to come down to the players. And I think there's no better way to assess whether or not players are really as good as we had predicted them to be and analyzed them to be than when you have a legitimate head coach who knows how to help teams win, who he can't get these guys to get out there and play better basketball. And so if I'm Billy Donovan and I'm frustrated with the team's effort, that's got to already tell you something. It doesn't matter whether or not you like Billy Donovan if you're a player. The fact that he doesn't like your effort says more about you than it does say about the team. It's not the organization's fault. Like, you're getting paid to go out there and play game basketball. So if your effort is in question, it really says more about what. And you also have to think about it from that perspective too, Shaw. Like, you're playing against somebody else. You're not playing against the coach. You're playing against another team. The other team is making you look bad. So if your own coach is questioning your effort because you don't seem to want to compete against whoever you're playing up against, to me says more about you and whether or not you really want to stay playing as a professional NBA basketball player than whether or not this is about you being a good basketball player, bad basketball player, things that you can improve on. It's a question of whether or not you just want to even bother playing in the league.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, as we record, Wendell Carter is shooting, I think, 27%. Kobe White shooting like 28%. Like, that's not going to get it done, fam. Like, what are we doing out here? So there's got to be better efforts. And Levine, 19.5 on 47% shooting, not bad, but rebounds and assists way down from what they were. He's averaging like a block and a half, a rebound and a half, an assist and a half. I don't know. It's just some weird stuff going on in Chicago. They've gotten beaten handily by Atlanta and Indiana the first two games. So we'll see what's next for them this upcoming week. But Billy Donovan's got to make some changes maybe to that starting lineup. And maybe it involves White going back to the bench and coming off the bench as a spark plug as opposed to a starter who's trying to initiate offense.
Yeah, man, Chicago Bulls need to be careful, man, because if they don't get this thing straightened out, man, they're gonna be opening up their new arena out there in Schitt's Creek. I'll tell you that right now.
What the actual fuck?
You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Callie Warren Shaw, the Baseline NBA podcast. And our topic for The Drop, it's been a long time coming, man. We have not done this in quite some time, but we only thought about this because certainly the year 2020-21 has lent ourselves for us to kind of keenly look at some players. And we say to ourselves, man, we think that there is room for hoop redemption, right? Like, we've excoriated some players. We've lambasted them. We've obviously have said, are they good? Are they not good? I think that when you talk about some of the players that we're going to address, it really does come down to, in their heart of hearts, they do believe that they belong in the NBA. They do believe that they still have greatness in them, or greatness to achieve. And so that's the reason why hoops redemption is one of our grand old topics to discuss, man, because it's not about just, laying into these guys. That's not fair. It's not right. But I do think that we need to set the table, like kind of lay it out plainly on why we think these guys have an opportunity to redeem themselves. And Shaw, you laid out a couple of players who I obviously think are great picks for our selection of hoops redemption. So the first person I want you to lay into for me is why you think Victor Oladipo, this is a season of hoops redemption.
Vic is in a contract year, so if nothing else, if he wants to get his bag, he better have some sort of redemption. Whether that's going to be in Indiana or somewhere else. If he wants somebody else to pay him, Miami, Boston, whoever, New York, whatever it is, like, listen, bro, you got to come out here. You mean to
tell me he can't live off of his R&B career?
You could not quite as comfortably. You know what I mean? He can live off it, but not quite as comfortably if he were to secure a near max deal. And I don't know even if that's even in the cards for him going forward. I mean, he would have to be like historically good, and Indiana have to make a crazy run in the playoffs, I think, for them to go give him max dollars. But I think he can come close to it in some aspect if he can show that he can be a 20-point per game guy, 4 or 5 rebounds, 3-4 assists, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's acceptable. If he can get into that 25-point per game range, something like that, then awesome. Will the touches be there? Is a question, simply because Sabonis is a frigging beast, and the fact that TJ Warren has really matured and blossomed into another great offensive option for them. So I think some of those things might be an issue, but it's a matter of, can he show efficiency? Can he show leadership, especially after alienating some of his teammates in the bubble with all kinds of reports about wanting to join other teams and rosters and, whatever, and just maybe not even wanting to be in Indiana altogether. So he's got a lot on his plate and his shoulders to try to have some redemption this year.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from with Victor Oladipo. And I think in some respects, because of the fact that there was the off-season, discussions about him not wanting to be in Indiana, whether he doesn't think that was true, I certainly think that was true. And I think when there's too many voices in the room speaking for you rather than you speaking for yourself a little bit more outwardly, then it's clear that there was some kind of conversations going on. And whether you let it or you let it leak, the fact of the matter is that it's what it is. So I think from that perspective, how people perceived you, have looked at you as a player in the NBA, for the franchise, for the organization, given what you've been through with the Orlando Magic and OKC, this is a year or an opportunity for you to kind of help, kind of quell the doubters about whether or not, you should be considered an elite 2 guard in the game. And so as long as he stays healthy, he's certainly capable of showing statistics that can lend to that argument. But I think it also has to be about how he helps lead this Indiana Pacers team, which again is a middling basketball team that's going to always be in the shadow of the Milwaukee Bucks now that Giannis has got his contract extension. So if this is no longer going to be Victor Oladipo's team, he better prove damn well that he wants to be a part of somebody's team that he can help be better than what he has shown us out of his own roster. All right, Shaw, you have Marvin Bagley, who I find very interesting because I don't know if we talk about Marvin Bagley nearly as much as I think maybe you hope to have talked about Marvin Bagley, which probably lends to the reason why you have him listed on your roster for Hoops Redemption.
What's that old song? You know what I mean? Marvin, he was a friend of mine.
Yeah, right.
Listen, I want to see Bagley succeed. I think a lot of what it stems from is he's coming off just a crazy injury-riddled season last year. And then when you're in that draft where Luka Doncic and Trae Young were available and you were selected above both of those guys as a number 2 pick, it's a little bit of yikes scenario here, right? Like, it's like, you've got to feel like I've got to prove myself and I've got to figure out a way to kind of get things done. Luke Walton is saying all the right things. They want to force feed him minutes. They want an opportunity. They want him to play through his mistakes. He's active. He can be a good plus rebounder, and learning to be more of an efficient scorer. I think he's not really going to be a playmaker, at least that doesn't project as that as yet. Might be able to extend his range out to, 18 to maybe even the 3-point line as well too. But I think Bagley is really trying to prove that he's worth the selection. And while he may never actually attain that to some degree, because Luke and Trae are just that good, he still can have a great NBA career. And as part of a Sacramento team that is even surprising some teams as well too. We didn't always talk about them, but I think Sacramento has some high hopes and they don't want to be written off in the West. And if Bagley can produce, they won't be, and they'll be competitive throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, Bagley's window is closing. I think fortunately.
God damn, 3 years?
No. Wait, man. Why do you always take what I'm saying to such the level? What I'm saying is Bagley's window is closing for the Sacramento Kings because they can no longer afford to keep bringing marginally good players, to not. And I guess usually when you're bringing players on, you want to leave room to allow the players to come out and compete, but you don't want to give them comfort. You don't want them to make them feel comfortable like your spot, your position, your role is good. Like if you look at the Sacramento Kings, they pretty deep from the wings perspective when you've got Harrison Barnes, Jabari Parker, Glenn Robinson III, Justin James, Robert Woodward. Are any of those guys taking Harrison Barnes' spot? No. Okay? Harrison Barnes stays healthy. Harrison Barnes is basically still one of their best athletically gifted wing players that they've got on the roster. Now, if you're hoping for that to be from a guy like Marvin Bagley, all I'm saying is that window is kind of closing where if you're not seeing anything astoundingly great, you may have to start considering what part of the roster are you going to start putting guys in there that you think are going to give you the best chance to improve at that position. So that's all that I'm saying, man. I ain't saying this guy ain't never going to play in the NBA. I'm just saying if you're the Sacramento Kings and you have a young team and you're building and you're trying to move upward, you're trying to see upward, how many more bites at the apple do you give a guy like Marvin Bagley to hold his position? Remember, they did the same thing with Willie Cauley-Stein, right? He was supposed to be a project. And look where he is now. He's obviously found something a little bit better for him in Dallas. But again, how many times did the Sacramento Kings give Cauley-Stein opportunity for him to hold that spot at the center position? And he's not panned out at that position for that team. I'm just saying that might be where we're trending with Marvin Bagley.
Fair enough. They have a history of, especially with the bigs.
You good, man? You good? Because I didn't want you to try to think you were trying to talk
your
about
original
the ledge,
statement
man.
your original statement is jarring. Like the window is closing. Like, what do you mean? Year 3. But Sacramento has a history with their bigs.
I can't believe we've been doing this for so long. You completely think the worst of me. Okay.
No. But Harry Giles, they just decided, F it, we don't care. Just go. They didn't even retain his birthright, so he's out of there. The same thing with Cauley-Stein after that. You're like, not so much. So at least with Bagley, they exercise his 4th-year option already, and we'll see where that lands going into the upcoming seasons. But yeah, good point. Good stuff.
Good stuff. I had to save myself from myself. I don't even understand what I'm doing here. All right, Shaw. Lauri Markkanen. I definitely see this as being a Hoop Redemption topic. Probably should have moved him up the food chain for you because I actually thought that this kid was going to be a solid basketball player. And really, to me, he's been more of an anchor to the Chicago Bulls because it seems like they've basically rested the organization's future on whether or not this guy was going to be the face for that franchise. And he clearly has been but to even get this kid on the basketball court to look like, he wants to be among one of the guys playing in the NBA seems to be a stretch even still. Can Billy Donovan give him his hoops redemption?
Yeah, we hope so. He just hated his life last year in Chicago, and he hated that coach and what they made him do. Then he was playing through the
Boylan.
And playing through the rib injury or whatever it is. He was basically relegated to what the Spurs are turning LaMarcus into. Now, again, it's fine for LaMarcus at this stage of his career and what the rest of the Spurs have around them. But for Markkanen, who came in as a guy who could get on the block a little bit, shoot the mid range, shoot the three, can kind of score at all three levels to some degree. To just be relegated to a 3-point stand in the corner shooter wasn't a great option for him. So I think Donovan understands that Markkanen, there's more to his game. He's hopefully healthy this year as well, too. And while we talked about Chicago not off to a great start, Markkanen's played well in the first couple of games. Almost not quite a double-double, but nearing that. It's decent efficiency. And I hope that this is a year that he's going to really bounce back and take a step forward for himself. As a result of last year, they did not give him a contract extension. So he's basically playing like, all right, well, let's see how it goes, right? He's have to bet on himself here a little bit because Chicago did not bet on him.
Is it okay to say the window's closing on Lauri Markkanen? I just want to make sure.
It very well could be in Chicago. They may trade his ass.
Yeah, they may trade his ass. But I will say this much. If Billy Donovan can develop Markkanen the same way that Billy Donovan helped develop Steven Adams, you may see a more physically better player in Markkanen than what we've seen in years. I believe at times the frailty of some players is more mental than it is physical tools. And so a guy like Markkanen doesn't play physical basketball. And I think it was exacerbated even more playing under Boylan, who clearly did not put him in a position to learn how to play physical basketball. I think with Billy Donovan, you're going to see him emphasize more on Markkanen being a more physically forceful basketball player. Get down there, take some fouls, put yourself in the best position to get better shots, get to the free throw line. This is where Markkanen was being lauded, that he's capable of getting to that place, to being in that place, but no one has put him in the position to do that. I think he's getting an opportunity to do that. Whether or not it's going to translate to him showing great numbers, I don't know. I know that now that you have taken the sticker being the face of the franchise off of Markkanen's, forehead, I think this is all about him coming out and playing basketball and playing good basketball. And you doing that for Billy Donovan, I think, bodes better for him than what I think we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, well said. Markkanen has a lot to prove. Donovan has the chops and essence to try to help him develop, especially changing the offense around a little bit for him. And I think anything can be better than last year for him, like just anything. All
right, Shaw. So let's quickly go through some honorable mentions that we have listed here for Hoops Redemption. I want to go more on the high profile ones because I'm really curious on why you brought these two guys up into the fray. Steph Curry and Blake Griffin. Give me your take on why you believe that Steph Curry and Blake Griffin need to have hoops redemption for this upcoming season.
Well, I mean, we talked about Golden State earlier, right? And I think Curry, he wants to prove that he's MVP level, even further solidifying his place as an all-time great. And if he can drag this Warriors team into the playoffs and maybe hopefully force a first-round upset, while we don't think that's capable right now based on what we discussed earlier, I think he's on that level right now where he wants to prove, too, that he can do it without Clay. And I think there's some ego in that. And while I don't think Curry is an egotistical guy, there's just a competitor in him that I think is going to come throughout the course of this year. So Curry is a hoops redemption candidate because some people have taken the respect off of his name a little bit. And I think he hears that and wants to be better than I think he's shown, especially in the early going.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you came up with Blake Griffin as well, too, because I really do think that Blake Griffin has been lost in a space where a lot of it has been predicated, a lot of it has been motivated by the census saying he's one of the most overhyped, front court players in NBA history, or he's, I don't think he was ever as good as everyone made him out to be. Listen, Blake Griffin's athleticism and the way that he came into the NBA definitely made him not just must-see TV, but also must-watch as far as one of the more dangerous basketball players, just because of the way that he could, acclimate his skill set and apply it. He's had bad circumstances. He certainly has not helped himself, especially when he was playing in Lob City. But to your point, Shaw, you're playing for a Detroit Pistons team where when you come in, you're supposed to help this team get to the playoffs. Then after this team totally was a disappointment, you dismantle the whole damn team, and so you're the only one left. Arguably is going to be the worst basketball team in the NBA. If you're Blake Griffin, you got to make something good out of this. And I agree with you that this is your possible chance at Hoops Redemption to validate yourself that if somebody is going to trade to bring you on, that you're going to be an added helpful piece and not a contract, a liability or, a contract asset that you're going to be moved elsewhere. And all you're going to be doing is being moved from team to team to team until you finally sign for the veteran minimum. This has got to be the year that Blake Griffin proves to people that you can still be a premier front court player and that you can actually help a basketball team that wants to take the next step or needs that extra piece for them to possibly win a championship.
The last part of what you said is it's so poignant to me. As we said in the East preview, Blake is playing great, good soldier, saying all the right things. And hey, if we need to develop young guys, I'm about it, et cetera, et cetera. He's not pouting, not crying. He understands the circumstances. He knows he has to rebuild his credibility in terms of being healthy. Number one, even staying on the damn court. He's transitioned his game almost in a Brook Lopez type fashion. He's a competent three-point shooter. Second game of the year, he made 7 threes. Like, what the F? Blake Griffin's out here lighting it up in the three-point line. And if he can continue that type of play while remaining healthy, especially with some level of efficiency, then teams are going to want him, and he won't have to languish in Detroit much longer. I think a contender will, that contract is huge, but in a limited role or a pseudo-limited role, and he can potentially get us over the top as a guy who can score, rebound, and play make a little bit. I think he might have to stay in Detroit too long if he can continue some semblance of the level play that he's shown in early going.
All right, Sean, and you have two other players that I think should definitely be made mention of, and ironically, they're playing on both. They're both playing on the same team. John Wall and Demarcus Cousins. And you know what? I rightfully can understand where you're coming from, but they offer two different perspectives on why Hoops Redemption is necessary for these guys. And why don't you go ahead and explain from your take why it's necessary that they get mentioned?
Well, Wall simply because of the contract. He's I don't know if he can
albatross of a contract, right? It's
right.
Crazy.
Yeah. So he wants to prove that, and he's been fighting for his respect and redemption for a very long time. He's always felt he's one of the top 5-point guards in the league, especially when he was healthy. And the fact that he didn't necessarily always get that level of respect is always bothered him. He's always had a chip on his shoulder about it. So I think coming now into Houston, getting a fresh start away from Bradley Beal, whatever ends up happening in the James Harden situation, the fact that Wall is going to be paid $47 million, in the third year of his player option, which be damn sure he's taking that. He wants to make sure that he's worth it. And if he can get back to, I don't even know what the numbers are, but some level of health, number one, but a guy who can score in the teens and get you 7-8 assists a game, I think that will be acceptable enough for him, and hopefully he can get back into a 20 and 10 type guy at some point. It's unrealistic probably, but I think he's not that far away in terms of high teens or mid teens and maybe 7-8 assists. I think he can definitely do that. I don't know if we'll see the explosiveness defensively in terms of like his chase down ability on blocks and things of that nature and getting in the passing lanes, but Wall has a little bit more than I think some people are giving him credit for, and I think we're going to see that. And with DMC, listen, a guy who's on a non-guaranteed contract, number one, I think there's a lot of teams that should have taken a swing here. And yes, I fully admit I'm a Cousins apologist. I just think the guy is underrated in a lot of ways. And I know he comes with a lot of deficiencies, especially on the defensive side of things. But I just feel like he's one of the more talented big men we've seen. And if the injuries didn't rob him of a lot of his athleticism, we'd be talking about a guy who could potentially, again, proverbially a guy who put up great stats on bad teams, but could have been in line at some point, maybe for the Hall of Fame, just in terms of statisticals. But where he's not going to get there now, unfortunately. But can he just have a good season where he's healthy and can contribute and be an efficient rebounder, a guy who can shoot it from the 3-point line, in addition to still playing some bully ball down low? I feel like Houston is uniquely poised again to have a guy like him contribute alongside Christian Wood. They can complement each other very well. And I think Cousins, if he's healthy, is going to have a very good year as well too. So Hoops Redemption in store for both of these dudes.
All right. And my final add to the Hoops Redemption, Shaw, Nicholas Batum. Listen, the guy, disappears when he takes this albatross of a contract, 5-year, 120 plus mil. Everyone was just like, wow, it hurt the Charlotte Hornets more than it hurt Nicholas Batum. But I think in the long term, it does hurt a guy like Batum because he was a great, versatile wing player. And so now, whoever it is deciding to sign him, you clearly are not depending on him to do anything that you're not getting from your starters. But if he is somebody that can come in, be a solid role player like he is right now for the Los Angeles Clippers, this is a great plus to get him at the veteran minimum for him to do the things that he is capable of doing with less the pressure and less the burden that's going to be on his shoulders. He's not carrying the weight of any franchise or any team or anything. So I'm encouraged by the fact that Nicholas Batum has an opportunity for him to kind of reestablish himself as being the Swiss Army knife player that he has always been, even in his years as a Portland Trailblazer, that can definitely benefit a team like the Los Angeles Clippers, who we cannot, count out the fact that they are gunning for the Los Angeles Lakers and they are gunning for some kind of opportunity to play themselves in the Western Conference Finals and hopefully to get to an NBA Finals. And you need all of the versatility that you can get on any side of the basketball if you're the LA Clippers.
Yeah, I love that pick. I think Batum offers a great complement of skills in terms of being able to switch defensively, rebound a little bit, play make a little bit as well too, and shoot corner threes, on driving kickouts as well. So a nice pickup for the Clippers in a year where everyone was kind of doubting them, so to speak, because they lost Harrell and some others as well too. Like Batum is a nice guy to come here and place, especially while Morris is out with injury. I think this is a great selection for Hoops Redemption for sure.
All right. Well, there you have it, guys, man. What a jammed-packed show. So many players, so many teams, so much to get into, and it's just the first week of the NBA. Cannot wait for how your boys will be laying it all out, going over everything happening in the association on a weekly basis. We appreciate you guys for hanging with us, and we want to hear from you. Who do you think is deserving of Hoops Redemption, right? Be sure to get at us at NBA Baseline. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. Thank you for hopping on board with us. We'll catch up with you